But really the purpose of what we're trying to do with this I-35 corridor plan is define a vision for the entire corridor that is both innovative to, how we're changing as our future. It's realistic, it can actually be funded and built someday, but also addresses needs that are there today and as they might change over the future. And that involves needs with safety, efficiency, how people are moving through the corridor and across the corridor, resiliency. I know that's a common topic of today and a concern for how we design and do improvements in the future, and is accessible for all modes of travel. Our title is about Interstate 35, but we are looking at how people move along and across the corridor. And ultimately, we're looking to the long term. Tonight is going to be very focused on existing conditions and kind of where we're currently at. But this plan will look at the long term and what is this corridor, what are the needs moving out into the future. So our study approach, just very generally, our timeline, we started this summer with our existing conditions analysis, and we're hoping to wrap this phase of our work up by the end of the year. So kind of wrapping up existing conditions and where are we going for the future. Then we get into the design and evaluate phase. So this winter and into the summer of 2023, when we start to really think about what are the changes that are needed and how do we want to plan for that future. And we go through a very detailed evaluation process where it's not only what are those ideas, but what are the benefits and trade-offs and how do they compare and cost. And then finally, it will end with an implementation plan. So, thinking about what are the improvements that are needed and how do those sort of schedule out, what's the right sequence of improvements over the next 20 years for that. And we'll be documenting, of course, all of this in a final report. So we'll be done with our work, this I-35 corridor plan, in fall of 2023. So we've talked a little bit already about the study area. It is big. We are looking at 14 miles of I-35, and you can see on the map, we're from Midway Township here on our western or southern boundary, all the way through, the downtown and 26th Avenue on the north. There's nearly 29,000 people that live within a half mile of this corridor. And we've got a lot of infrastructure, 16 interchanges, 30 intersections. I'll have more details on all of that coming up. But as Dan alluded to, we have kind of segmented up our work because there's definitely different contexts of I-35. The purple is what we're calling the rural area from about Midway Township area through Cody Street. And then the urban is in the green, from Cody to approximately Garfield. And then the peach is sort of the downtown area up to our northern limits. And the images on the screen are just showing how I-35, not only the areas surrounding I-35, but also the corridor itself change and look different from south to north. We have a range of traffic volumes along this corridor. We've got about 29 or 30,000 cars a day on the purple segment. It does increase in our urban area, the green, just with all of the connections that are intersecting this area in the 35,000 to 46,000 range. And then back to about 30 or 35,000 through downtown, definitely tapering off near the north end as it moves and transitions to US 61. So before we get into some of the details, it's often helpful to think about where we've been. And as part of that, we put together some different information on the history and the context of I-35 and what it means, what it's been and what it means and what it provides. And so this is dating back to its construction, its inception. I-35 has been around in our study area for nearly 50 years, at least portions of it. And it was the last completed section of the national interstate system. It led to this new era of, interstate access and connections to the region, and certainly some revivals and economic influences that we'll talk about later. But it also came at a price. It was a disruptor in terms of its development itself. Required demolition of hundreds of buildings through 14 different neighborhoods. I'm sure many know of the lawsuit on the north end that sort of rearranged its alignment and preserved that lakefront access near the Leif Erikson Park. Today, it does still serve as a divider, especially in this urban context area from Grand Avenue to Central Avenue. Again, this is where there was a lot of displacement to build the corridor, and today it still remains a physical border between West Duluth and Lincoln Park neighborhoods and the waterfront and the adjacent job centers. Most of the highway through this area is of course elevated, and it does allow for some pass-throughs, but we know from previous engagement efforts in the area and just our own analysis that some of those pass-throughs aren't particularly welcoming today for bicyclists and pedestrians. And of course, as it gets more at grade, returns to at grade, those connections are even more difficult. This theme of division and segregation continues to the downtown segment. Of course, this is where the central business district is, and the major employers, civic, government, entertainment uses. It has a segregation between two distinct places, and that's shown on the graphic there of downtown Duluth, and then the Canal Park and Museum and Entertainment District. We know that there have been efforts that are currently ongoing and have done a lot of work to think about and kind of reimagine what this could be, particularly in terms of land uses and just how this corridor interacts and the connections across. We will be looking and considering those ideas and through our analysis as part of our study, and what other options might be out there as well. That's part of our role in a corridor study, is to think pretty holistically about different alternatives to consider and evaluate. I-35 also is a definer. We were looking at demographic information within the areas surrounding the corridor, and found that compared to the city of Duluth as a whole, the populations within the half-mile surrounding this corridor tend to be higher rates of renters, residents without vehicles, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and just overall lower household incomes. And this is mostly driven by residents in West Duluth, Lincoln Park, and kind of the core downtown areas. So, this just kind of understanding who's here also helps us think about the future and what needs might be, particularly as we talk about residents without vehicles as such. But I-35 is also a connector. Within the rural areas, I-35 provides vital connections to statewide access and just the larger transportation system. It also provides opportunities for some redevelopment and infill development, and the graphics and sort of the images on the screen are showing different things that have been planned by the city of Duluth in terms of catalyst areas where there are some development and redevelopment opportunities. Most of those sort of following, in close proximity to I-35 or access off of it. It's also a resource. There are major employment centers that generally follow, and you can kind of see the color pattern on this graphic, that generally follow I-35 and some of the other major transportation corridors within the city. Of course, it provides major access to these employment centers like the downtown and Canal Park, Lincoln Park, West Duluth. So just some interesting trends of economics. I also want to mention that the University of Minnesota Duluth is also currently studying the economic impacts of the interstate and kind of focusing on that downtown Duluth area. We've been in coordination with them. I don't have any of their findings that I'm aware of, but we reached out it's probably been about a month ago now, just to kind of see where they're at, and agreed to stay in coordination with each other. So we know that's going on, and we want to consider what that might mean for what we're doing as well. And lastly here, I-35, the last piece of the context, of course, is it is a resource, not only from the employment, but also from the tourism. Just some interesting stats from tourism revenue from Northeast Minnesota in general, and kind of a bigger, more regional picture. Obviously this area has a big impact on that. And 6.7 million annual visitors from tourism. So a large draw, which also influences what this corridor is and needs to be.